welcome to Exposed News Outlet. My name is Andrea and I'll be your host. Before I get started, I would like to ask if you could please like and share this video. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel and check the bell to make sure that you get all my latest updates from all my latest videos. I'd appreciate it. It really helps for me to get my message out to the masses and for the algorithm, other things as well. Today we're going to get into topics here that have been brought to my attention. Well, it's been front and center for the last 10 plus years, especially, although it's always kind of been a touchy subject, and more so within the last 8 years plus. The Republicans, especially the MAGA extremists, have been pushing these anti-LGBT rhetoric and agenda talking points, basically trying to divide and conquer. Although the acronyms may have been added to recently or have changed somewhat, the history runs deep through the course of humanity for tens of thousands of years, actually. As long ago as ancient Egypt, which was actually named Kemet. Egypt is the name given by the Greeks. Back in ancient Kemet, there were more than 15 LGBTQ plus gods and goddesses that ranged from transgender, intersex, to bisexual, and gay and lesbian. These are not, as they call this new agenda, transgender everything agenda that Trump likes to try to use for a scare or fear tactic. It's actually pretty dangerous because it actually brings discrimination, which is already prevalent. It just adds to that, puts fuel to the fire, and it brings violence. And sometimes even some of these people are actually murdered for simply being LGBTQ. This is not some new age issue or agenda. The right-wing media likes to say that George Soros is funding this agenda where they're trying to groom and transform the citizens into transgender or homosexuals. It really has no basis in facts, and it's just not even true. Simply because George Soros has actually donated to a charity, and the charity was an LGBTQ charity that helped at-risk LGBTQ youth and just in general for LGBTQ causes. That alone doesn't constitute an agenda or any type of grooming, or it's nonsense. Again, it's fear-mongering meant to divide and conquer and to get us to argue and fight with each other and not get along. It's also an age-old white nationalist disinformation and propaganda tactic that they've used, in addition to their racism and xenophobia. They've, for a long time, advocated against LGBT causes and against homosexuals and transgenders, oftentimes pushing disinformation and lies, more fear-mongering. There's actually no basis, factual proof that kids that are brought up in queer households have issues with sexuality or any kind of, in any way they're not groomed. In fact, a lot of times they go on to live heterosexual lives and have a well-rounded, more open mind, I guess, and less judgmental opinion of people and their differences. This lie, that they keep trying to say that the LGBTQ are trying to groom kids and pushing these book bans and censorship, and a lot of times these book bans even go beyond the LGBTQ. Some of them are actually Black history books or biographies of people that were important from the past in Black history. And these stories are important, and it's important that we fight against censorship and whitewashing and white nationalism. Frankly, it's getting blown out of completely out of control, and sadly emboldening these organizations such as the KKK, the Proud Boys, and other groups to go and basically push domestic terrorism on the streets of these cities and all around the United States. And a lot of these people even come as far as Canada down here just to push domestic terrorism, which is crazy. And it's something that we are better than, and we shouldn't be dealing with this kind of stuff, especially in 2024. We need to turn the page, as Kamala Harris has said many times, on all this dangerous rhetoric and division and blatant racism and ignorance, bigotry. Basically more fear-mongering. It always gets worse around election time too, especially with the front runner being Donald Trump, who is he's been a racist for, well, a documented racist since the 1970s and 1980s, when they refused to rent properties to Black and brown residents. Just blatant racism. Also, there have been reports of him not, well, underpaying his Hispanic, the people that were building his towers, and some of his residents. He would pay them minimum wage, and just cruel work ethics and very cruel treatment on the Black and brown employees especially. And this was nothing new either. His father was also a well-known racist. I mean, he was just a complete jerk. So again, there's no proof whatsoever of LGBTQ parents grooming their kids or any of this nonsense that they try to put forward, or even about LGBTQ pedophiles. They like to try to group it all together, and I'm not saying that there's never been an LGBTQ pedophile. However, it's just not something that's common, and you can't just say because one person is this way that the whole group of people are a monolith or are the same. And there's a lot of heterosexual pedophiles that have been well documented as well, including many allegations and documented legal filings on the current frontrunner of the Republican candidate for president. So many times this has been reported on and even covered up by a lot of the corporate CEOs that are currently funding the Trump campaign and pushing this rhetoric. The right wing's been pushing this fear-mongering for almost a decade, if not longer, and they've really been pushing this white nationalist that for many decades, even from the 90s and early 2000s. There have been church groups such as Reverend Phelps that have traveled around the United States boycotting the graduations of high school students that were awarded the Matthew Shepard Scholarship. The Matthew Shepard Scholarship is a scholarship that was awarded to LGBTQ youth that had a decent grade point average and met a certain criteria. Matthew Shepard was actually from Wyoming, and he was killed in Colorado and burned at the stake because he was gay and he was targeted. Once again, this is the violence and the blatant homophobia and the dark history that's surrounded our past and with the LGBT pretty much for the course of humanity. Many times, it was worse than in others, but certainly it hasn't been quite the easy road. The same insecure people whom push hate, bigotry, racism, homophobia, transphobia, sexism, and division are nothing more and nothing less than fearful, hateful people driven by negativity, hate, and anger. They're very weak-minded and ignorant. They are now literally paying children to speak on some of these topics. I believe a lot of these people, even that I went to school with, now are old enough to have their own children going to school, and they're putting these age-old discrimination, fear-mongering, and blatant lies and just evil discrimination into these kids' minds, and kind of perverting the whole narrative, especially around LGBTQ. I think a lot of these people also feel threatened because there is more of a platform today for LGBTQ artists in the music industry and in Hollywood, on film, and in other avenues. We see this more and more, and I think a lot of people feel threatened, especially the white nationalists, and they want nothing more than to push violence and just hate and discrimination. They don't want the LGBTQ to have any kind of platform. In fact, they would, they want nothing more than violence or, death or even mass incarceration of LGBTQ people just simply for living their lives. This seems to be a common theme, especially in the right wing, where they like to judge and tell us what we can and can't do with our bodies, and who we can and can't love, what books we can read and what books we can't. Seems to be, they like to say that they're the party of freedom and rights, and yet they seem to be taking all of our freedoms and rights away from us and telling us what we can and can't do with our own bodies. They're now paying children to push this vile and toxic, hateful disrespect and disregard for common courtesy of others, and pushing discrimination in schools. I actually have a clip that I wanted to show of a girl that's very proud, as she likes to say. She was the youngest person to ever speak at a Trump rally, and she was 6 years old when she first spoke at a Trump rally, and she's been pushing this disinformation and this vile toxicity ever since. And frankly, it's disturbing, especially since she likes to say that these school board officials are grooming children, and that teachers and schools are grooming children simply for having LGBTQ books, or these books, Black history books and other books. And yet she's actually homeschooled. She doesn't even go to public schools, but for some reason she likes to tell them how to run their school systems and their school board. She even is very disrespectful, calls out the family members of these school board members and faculty just simply for their own political beliefs and beliefs but she's basically saying that she's being censored, even though she's pushing censorship. Makes no sense, contradicts itself, and again, they keep trying to get these particular sound bites that they can put in these political ads and whatever to push more disinformation and fear-mongering. Books don't turn people gay, first of all. That's just crazy if anybody thinks that. And books certainly don't hurt people either. I think it's sad that these Republicans and MAGA extremists are focused on banning books when there are literally children dying in schools from school shootings and mental health issues and other things that we could be focusing our attention and our resources on. And I think it's sad that they're just pushing more violence and discrimination in schools, especially with LGBTQ youth, which is, they have the highest suicide rate. When I was younger, it was 70%, I'm pretty sure. I'd have to double check with that. I'm almost certain it's much higher now. Sadly, these kind of blatant attacks don't help in any way with that either, or with mental health. She actually goes multiple times to the school board and harasses these school board officials multiple times. These parents actually sit and clap and cheer on, and they encourage this dysfunctional behavior, and it's like a bunch of circus clowns, literally, and they're encouraging dysfunction and just blatant disrespect and disregard for other people, and teaching violence and disorder and chaos. It's all low frequency and negativity, which brings, negativity attracts more negativity. It's literally the laws of attraction. So again, nothing good comes from this, and they're only trying to get their little sound bites, and she's acting like a mini Marjorie Taylor Greene, and just completely it's lunacy, literally. I wanted to also, after I show the clip, which I'm going to get into here so you can see for yourself, and I do want to mention, she likes to say that the pride parades are about grooming children, and as if they're meant for the children or something. It's just complete lunacy and disinformation and blatant lies. I'm sure that she's been spoon-fed from her parents, who probably are, homophobic, transphobic, obviously, and have spoon-fed her these lies her whole life. Let me go ahead and show the clip here.
I'm back by popular demand. However, it seems I'm not so popular with certain people. One of them is your wife, Mr. King. She is very worried about me advocating for students. However, I want to commend her for bringing attention on her social media posts to some of my greatest accomplishments, like being the youngest person ever to give a speech on stage at a Trump rally. The crowd was over 10,000 people and millions more online. Also the fact I've been involved in politics since I was 6 years old. That was my own choosing, as my parents were completely uninvolved in politics until I expressed an interest in it. So, your wife, Mr. King, is upset that a 14-year-old is advocating so well for herself and others, that she's making her own decisions about the direction of her life. Apparently, she fails to recognize her own hypocrisy in all this, considering she supports the Pride movement, a movement that openly touts children as toddlers deciding to change their gender. Let me speak.
No.
And adults I reclaim my time. And adults must affirm that child's will.
Put it on social media. Keep going, Amelia.
Mr. King. I reclaim my time. This is my time to speak, not yours. Mr. King, others weighed in on your wife's social media posts. One called me an unfortunate child. I'm not unfortunate at all. The unfortunate children are those of leftist parents who use their children's transgender identity as a badge of honor, who fight to keep graphic books in school libraries so their children can read them, then be susceptible to being groomed or victims of crimes. They want drag queens in schools and even take their kids to pride parades where women expose their and everyone touts the virtues or lack thereof, with being part of all that insanity. No to all that. I am an extremely fortunate child. My parents taught me morals and values and how to critically think and do my own research. I have a dad who works extremely hard and even risked his life to serve our country in 2 wars. So I've learned respect for the American flag, Pledge of Allegiance, veterans, and love for our country. My parents recognized the decline of public schools and saved me from that toxic environment. I'm learning more being homeschooled than I ever did in public school. Perhaps your wife and her ilk feel threatened by me advocating for kids because I pose a threat to their system, a system that indoctrinates kids into mindless activists who will be unable to fully function in the real world or lead happy lives. My advice is to stop worrying about me and worry about the effects the public schools' destructive agendas are having on your own kids. I'm the fortunate one here. Your kids, not so much. Thank you.
Now, I want to go over some history about Pride and how it started and just the history of drag in general and LGBTQ, and go over the history so that we can put a lot of these blatant lies to rest and so people can cure some of their ignorance on exactly why, Pride is and what it's about. Drag balls have been going on since 1860s in New York City. In other areas, they've been going on much longer. In ancient Greece, men played the roles as female and males, likely because it was considered too dangerous or indecent for women to be on stage. In the 16th and 17th centuries, men actually played women because women weren't allowed on stage at that time either. In fact, the word drag is actually thought to have been originated from this time, because the men wore long dresses and skirts that dragged to the ground. That's where drag originated, the term drag. Vaudeville is famous for female impersonators, is what they were called. Julian Eltinge and Andrew Tribble were 2 famous female impersonators from the vaudeville times. Pantomime is the British genre of this female impersonation that was famous around that time. And then also the famous freak shows from the 19th and early 20th century where men performed in drag and, as the bearded women as well. From the 1860s on in New York City, and then in 1969 when then things came to a head in New York City when the riots occurred. It actually started June 28th, 1969 in New York City when the Stonewall Inn riots occurred. In the 1960s, things were much different, including the laws that were very cruel and discriminatory and general mistreatment for LGBT. This is what laid the groundwork for why it happened in New York City and at the Stonewall Inn. These are also the same cruel laws, by the way, that MAGA is trying to implement and bring back. The same laws that would bring discriminatory actions and behaviors and even imprisonment for those who disobey. Police raided the Stonewall Inn in June 28, 1969 and began arresting people and charging them, targeting those who were dressed in drag or transgender individuals that were there at the time, demanding that those dressed in drag show their identification for being unlawfully gender inappropriate, which harassment had been going on for quite some time. by this time. Only this day it was different. Police had started to barricade and surround the inn and surrounding neighborhood. They came in large numbers. It was the Irish police that were mostly employed in New York City at that time. Crowds started forming as they saw all the commotion building up on the streets outside, as the police started to bring people outside and arresting them in handcuffs along the wall. A police officer actually used his baton and hit or struck a lesbian. The crowd had seen it and had enough at that time. They were tired of all the injustices and targeting of the LGBTQ population, and they saw the blatant attack on the lesbian with the baton, and so they started pelting rocks and throwing stones at the police. 10 of the police actually made their way inside the Stonewall Inn and barricaded themselves inside, trying to get away from the stone throwing and chaos that had started to ensue after their blatant disrespect and targeting these individuals. As the crowd looked on, they actually pushed forward as the drag queens led the line. They were sassy Puerto Rican drag queens against the Irish cops. They were holding the line, and the drag queens were the ones who said, "We're not leaving." And they formed a chorus line outside and began dancing and singing. The drag queens led the line forward. They began to burn down the barricade to get back into Stonewall Inn, forcing the cops to flee. There was more anger and fight the second night, and there was no going back from this point. Levine, one of the activists, recalls, as they discovered their power that they never knew they had. The riots drug on for days and even got the attention of the national news, who had inspired groups of gay, lesbian, and trans to organize and led to the first U.S. Gay Pride Parade the following year in New York, LA, Chicago, and San Francisco. This is also why the month of June is Pride Month, because the Stonewall Inn riots happened in June. It was also the birthplace of the gay liberation movement. Pride has since come a long way in most cities. They actually have family-friendly events where it's more PG-13 and, less revealing outfits, etc., etc. Because some of the pride parades can get a little risky sometimes, but they do have family-friendly areas or kid zones where family-friendly events take place. A lot of people like to try to, because a lot of these families are actually LGBTQ as well, because LGBTQ people have kids as well. It's not just heterosexuals that have children, but heterosexuals do come as well to the pride parades and celebrate. A lot of times they have family members or friends, or they just, want to enjoy or celebrate and have a good time. As we all should. We should embrace each other's differences and not be so threatened by them. And we shouldn't let ignorance push fear or divide us. They have also always, since I was a kid, had teen shows at a certain time. Usually it was on a Saturday night or a Sunday night during the early evening before 9 p.m. because after 9 p.m. people under 21 couldn't be in the bar. So these all ages events were, it was a safe place where we could go and perform. We had teen pageants, stuff like that. They had the all ages drag show, and a lot of these teens and even as young as 12-year-olds actually would perform. It was it was actually pretty cool. And unless you have LGBTQ family members or a loved one that is LGBTQ, you probably don't know or understand completely. It might seem strange or weird to you or whatever, but I was 3 years old when I first put on makeup and high heels, and It was just something that was natural, and ever since I was 15 when I started performing in teen shows, and I was 16 when I first started my pageant run. I ran in Miss Teen Midwest National and Miss Teen Newcomer. Prior to the teen shows and stuff, though, and even all ages clubs, we didn't really have anywhere we could go that was safe. We would also usually meet up downtown by the river, which turned out to be very violent. There were many times that we had gay bashings that happened where these insecure people that were just evil and toxic would come down with baseball bats, beating people that were down there. There were many times that people were shot at or even shot. There were people that were beat with chains, stabbed with knives, all kinds of horrific things. And this is where we would go, and basically all hours of the night, some weekends, and it was just a very dangerous place. Myself was even had to dodge bullets down there. I've actually witnessed many people get shot in front of me just in Iowa alone, and it's usually more safe, in Iowa. So it's just something, if there isn't a safe environment or a safe place for the youth or for these kinds of activities, then they're going to find a way or a place to do it no matter what. So it's better to have safe resources in places already. Most individuals are well aware of their own desires and preferences from childhood on. As Lady Gaga likes to say, we were born this way. I've watched this all unfold over the past several decades, and it's always hatred being pushed from the KKK and the church groups like Reverend Phelps, who I spoke about earlier. They oftentimes try to wrap it around or use Christianity or religion as their defining reason, even though they're pushing very anti-Christian beliefs and rhetoric. Over the last 40 years, I've also personally watched the vile hatred towards LGBTQ and racism grow, especially directed towards black and brown individuals, and almost always, these fear-mongering haters are always from KKK and white nationalist groups, such as the Proud Boys and neo-Nazis and so on. They've been showing up like the domestic terrorists that they are, and pushing these crazy discriminatory behaviors, and just calling people vile names, and just assaulting people verbally and physically. And it's literally domestic terrorism. And honestly, if these individuals were black and brown and doing this same thing, they would almost certainly be arrested. But when these lunatics that are white are out there pushing anti-LGBTQ rhetoric and racism and xenophobia, then it's freedom of speech. The laws and this behavior that's celebrated by people like Donald Trump seem to be encouraged more and more daily. And you have these wannabe thugs terrorizing the streets and harassing citizens. The latest was also in Springfield, where he pushed blatant lies on the stage at the debates about the immigrants from Haiti, and chaos unfolded ever since. It just kept ramping up, different bomb threats and just crazy things unfolded. Seems to be what Trump likes to push for chaos, and a lot of times run on problems and not fix them. It's also what a lot of Project 2025 is blatant racism, mass deportations. The number keeps growing, before which supposedly there are 11 million undocumented illegal aliens here, and this number keeps growing, and all of these accusations that Shady Vance and Donald Trump keep pushing. This is the main issue and the foreword in the Project 2025. The foreword is actually anti-trans, and the very first page is also a direct attack on transgender people and their basic rights and fundamental abilities for healthcare. They're still mad that a black man won presidency in 2008 and then again the following election. And Trump was actually one of these people that was pushing the birther disinformation and lies, saying that Obama wasn't a citizen and just stupid, ignorant bigotry and racism. He also continues to poison the blood of our country with racism, bigotry, xenophobia, transphobia, homophobia, and blatant lies. No one from the left is grooming children, nor do we condone that. Most people don't even understand what or whom LGBTQ people are, or what it means to be LGBTQ, etc. They don't even know the difference between drag queens or transgender, and both are not the same. A lot of people like to paint the picture with one brush, as if everybody falls under the same category or under the same stroke of the brush, when really it's, a lot more complicated than that. People should actually, frankly, start minding their own business and stop worrying about what other people do with their bodies and who they love. In the great words of Tim Walz, mind your own damn business. If people did live their own lives and live and let live, it would be a much better world. They shouldn't worry about what others do with their bodies and who they love, what books they read, or any of these factors that they've been trying to push and trying to confuse and push blatant lies and divide and conquer tactics, as I've said before. Again, with all this being said and put into context, it keeps bringing me back to this attack that the MAGA cult and extremist, longtime bigots and white nationalists have been working on for over 50 years, which is now superheaded by the Heritage Group and co-authored by many of the closest allies of Trump and MAGA, including Kevin Roberts from the Heritage Group, Stephen Miller, who is one of Trump's former administration officials and close friends, confidant, partner in crime. He's a creep. Mark Meadows, who's another one of Trump's, he was the chief of staff, just to name a few. Again, these are co-authors of the Project 2025, and it's a very anti-trans agenda, including the forward, as I mentioned before, that directly attacks trans rhetoric, and it's more propaganda as the right tries to twist and pervert the very term of being woke, right? To say that it has something to do with gender identity and trying to mix this and, trying to push all of these fear-mongering tactics. And unfortunately, a lot of people believe a lot of things they read online, and they don't take the time to fact check or cross-reference, etc., which a lot of people should. And again, it would be a better place if they did. But being woke is actually a reference to a spiritual awakening of sorts, and it refers to being awoken or woke to the truth and conspiracy theories, propaganda, and lies, and especially the ones being pushed by the far right extremists. That's why they feel threatened by the word woke, and they also feel threatened because the term itself and many of the people that use it have gone through spiritual awakening. They've educated themselves on a lot of the history and the facts of our human history and many other factors, and they want to control this narrative. They don't want people to know the esoteric or occult knowledge and the fact that they're literally poisoning a lot of our foods and clothing and other things that we eat or do on the daily basis. So sadly, it's about greed and just pure evilness. The term woke has nothing to do with sexual orientation, sexual identity, or anything sexual for that matter. And it's these MAGA cultists that are trying to push this perverted concept of the term woke and trying to redefine a lot of these words that it's not true and it's just blatant lies. They're also trying to roll back our rights and freedoms and a lot of our liberties and bring us back to these cruel and discriminatory laws of the past and ways of the past instead of charting a new way forward, as Kamala Harris says, and as her policies and just her personality and character merit. Many other people even have their own personal understanding or definition of being woke, and it might be different to each person. It doesn't really, it's not one main thing, but in general, it's about being woke to reality, to the matrix, etc., etc. Basically, they feel threatened by this because they want to control the narrative. They want to control with mind control and all of these shiny objects or distractions they keep pushing. Sadly, they want to divide and have us fight each other because they don't want us conversing or figuring them out. Right-wing extremists are pushing these lies and disinformation at rallies, on commercial ads, and online as well, and even have Russian hacks pushing these same lies and disinformation tactics and anti-LGBTQ rhetoric and fear-mongering, even programming Russian bots to literally argue with people and to argue with these points. I just think it's important that we know the facts and that we keep everything 100. We keep everything honest. It's also important now more than ever to get your news from independent news sources, and not only the corporate media is a lot of times controlled by these same elites. A lot of them are actually funding the Trump campaign, so a lot of times they're going to kind of censor the news and the information we receive and make it more biased. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in today. So it's important to fact check, cross-reference, and rely on independent news as well. But again, the MAGA right, the far-right extremists keep pushing these age-old tropes of bigotry and hate all over again at a time when mental health is currently it's definitely a problem in the country and around the globe, as well as children being bullied. Mental health breaks are leading to violence and even mass shootings. Many lies, including the ones of George Soros, which I mentioned earlier. People don't even know who he is, honestly. Most people don't even know who he is, but there are so many he seems to be the go-to boogeyman. I hear Shady Vance even referring to him taking airplanes of women to states that offer abortions and all of these just blatant lies. That's not happening. It's not ever going to happen. And it's why we have to vote blue and get Kamala Harris into office so that we can put these crazies in the past. We also need to make sure that we flip or get the House of Representatives back into Democratic control and elect Hakeem Jeffries into the Speaker of House. So that, and hopefully we can keep the Senate as well, so that we can have the trifecta with Kamala Harris and get the much needed legislation through, including the um, Supreme Court reform. But again, I do want to say, just because you donate to a charity doesn't mean you're pushing a gay agenda. I think that people should educate themselves, stop believing everything you hear, and again, start fact checking more. Follow in more independent news sources, and again, it's all about respect. Respect your neighbors, love your neighbors, and we should actually be able to coexist, and no one should feel threatened. That's why they push negative attention towards a lot of these homophobics and transphobics. A lot of times are actually on the down low, and a lot of times they put so much attention towards like talking negative about these gay people or trans or whoever, that they bring more attention to the topic. In fact, they oftentimes look suspect, and it's because they are suspect. They're trying to deflect so that people won't think that they're into them, but a lot of times they are. I personally had this happen. I can't tell you how many times, but almost always the same people that harassed me would then later try to slip into my inbox or holler at me later, and it's sad, and frankly it's pathetic. So again, we should be able to coexist and live and let live, and people should start worrying about their own problems and their own bodies and who they love. I've also heard another theory as well from a psychic and a spiritual teacher. She actually has a beautiful concept about reincarnation, and she says that a lot of times people that are homosexual or transgender oftentimes have reincarnated prior lives as that gender, so they're not used to the new gender that they're in this current incarnation, which is it's a beautiful concept to think about. And it would actually it does kind of make sense as well. Supposedly, we're reincarnated multiple times from all different, many times actually, from different walks of life, social standings, ethnic backgrounds, you name it. And a lot of times, that's even how karma works, where you're actually reincarnated. You can either go reincarnate up or reincarnate down, or even into an animal or an insect, etc. So it's kind of an interesting concept as well about reincarnation and LGBTQ plus, or how it could actually possibly be that we're born this way. Project 2025 isn't just a direct aim at LGBTQ plus, but a roadmap of all the laws and freedoms they will take away. And some of them are so awful that they couldn't even be written down online or in this book, the Project 2025 handbook. And it's referred to as phase 4, where they have to be told this phase verbally because they don't want it written. That's how crazy and extreme these laws that they're pushing for are, in regulations, taking away the Constitution, taking away our rights and freedoms. All the while, they are actually pushing these lies and saying that it's the Democrats that are going to do this, when in fact it's literally in their handbook, in Project 2025, the 922-page handbook that they didn't just write for no reason. This is, and it's actually already been implicated in the states where Republican leaders are, such as Republican governors, etc. They've already started a lot of these, including the book bans and other extreme, the Trump abortion bans, and the hate campaigns where they're taking away women's rights, LGBTQ rights, healthcare, etc. We must do better, America and the world. We can and we will do better. We have to stop this hate. We must reject the hate and the fear and educate the ignorant. Much of the abortion ban itself originates from white nationalists. It's even written in a book called The Birth Dearth from the 1980s, and they said if they were able to stop 60% of women, white women to be exact, because 60% of the women that got abortions at that time were white, and if they could stop them from having those abortions, then white people would not become minority, well, as quickly. By 2030, I believe was the time frame, or 2020. It was 2030 or 2035. And then white people would retain their population and control of the power. And that's really what this all boils down to. They're fearful that they'll lose control. And, you see this already in the Republican MAGA extremist party, where they can't win by playing fair. They have to try to cheat, push lies and fear, and play into the darkest fears of humanity and just social norms, just blatant evil, disrespect, and discrimination that is bringing a lot of unnecessary violence and chaos onto our streets. We must vote for a true leader who will lead and protect us all and all of our rights and freedoms, not just those that they agree with or that agree with them. Before I wrap up the video, I do want to show a clip of Jane Elliott where she goes over the Trump abortion bans and the birth dearth. She's been a longtime advocate against racism and for LGBTQ rights, and she's a longtime advocate from Iowa, which is very unusual, especially for her age. And she's a voice that is very, 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 very needed at this time, and has been a blessing over the past several decades as she's showed the world her experiments, even on Oprah in the past. I'll show the clip. Another thing I wanted to touch on is these conservative MAGA extremists have also been very active at pushing blatant disinformation, especially on transgender, transphobia, and disinformation about trans, saying that the T in LGBT was just added in 2013. And this is a lie. It's actually been part of the abbreviation since 1988. They've gone by, we've used LGBT, and then later on LGBTQ plus, as more terms have been added since. But again, it's just more fear-mongering and just lies that they keep trying to say, as if this transgender agenda just popped out of nowhere in 2013 and was non-existent before that. And it's not true. So hopefully we can all come together and turn the page and chart a new way forward. As Kamala said, I don't think that we should be pushing fear or division or hate. I think that we should be uniting and coming together. We have climate crisis and so many different issues, including homelessness, which I don't personally, I believe, Big Pharma is responsible more than anyone for the homelessness issue that's gone on, but that's a topic for another video that I will be doing soon. So, I do, again, check out the list of the Egyptian gods and goddesses that were LGBTQ. It's very interesting if you look into the history of LGBTQ plus and those that shaped the way and fought for the rights, because they were hard fought. And that's what Pride is about. It's about celebrating. So we didn't always have these rights. And a lot of these people are trying to take us back to the time where we didn't have those rights. It's important that we know our history and that we know the facts. Otherwise, they will take us back. And we're not going back. Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it and hopefully you learned something new. Please like and share. It's very important that we get this information out, especially before the election. It's very important. This is not a normal election, and I will continue to release more videos coming out and touch on the latest hot topics, political. I do have another channel as well where I touch on non-political life hacks and beauty tips, different things, where I'll be bringing a lot more videos soon, especially once the election's over. Right now I feel like there's too much at risk and it's too important, and I'm going to be definitely releasing at least 1 or 2 videos a week, if not more. I'm going to try to do more. Hopefully I can do one every day, but in a perfect world, right? But again, please like and subscribe. Check the bell. Make sure that you select all for notifications so you can get all my latest videos and news. And again, it's important to get independent news from independent news outlets like mine. Thank you again. And be sure to watch for all my upcoming videos. Thank you. Have a blessed day. Oh, and before I go, please be kind to others and be kind to yourself.
And right now, white people are really frightened. If you don't understand the destruction of Planned Parenthood offices, and you don't understand the wall that we're going to build on the southern border of the United States, you haven't read the book The Birth Dearth by Ben Wattenberg. Ben Wattenberg was a brilliant Jewish man who was a member of the American Enterprise Institute, and he wrote a book, the first paragraph of which says, "The main problem confronting the United States today is there aren't enough white babies being born in this country." He was an advisor to presidents of the United States. He wrote the book in 1987. He says if we don't change this and change it rapidly, white people will lose their numerical majority in this country, and this will no longer be a white man's land. Now, I'm not misrepresenting this. I'm telling you almost exactly what he says. He says there are 3 things we can do to solve this. Number 1, we could pay women to have babies, as they have been doing in Western European nations for years. Then he says, and these are his words, not mine, unfortunately, we would have to pay women of all colors to have babies, so we don't want to do that. He says the second thing we could do is increase the number of legal immigrants that are allowed into this country every year. Then once again he says, unfortunately, the vast majority of those wanting to come to this country today are people of color, so we don't want to do that. The third thing he says, and women had better pay attention to this, 60% of the fetuses that are aborted every year are white. If we could keep that 60% alive, that would solve our birth dearth. Does that sound like racism to you? And if it doesn't, I want to know why it doesn't.